Hey everyone, it's Joe, and welcome back. I said before that I was going to do a video on this myDemocracy, so I'm just going to walk you through this website here, and hopefully we learn something. So this is the main page of it. As you can read, that it's going to be a new way to open up a conversation about electoral reform. But if you notice right at the bottom, there's a disclaimer. If you were under 16 years of age, please speak to your parent. Now, last I checked in Canada, voting was for people that were 18 years old or older. This is also anonymous, so people could fill this out as much as they want. I just worry that it might kind of skew the results, but we won't worry too much about that. I just want to get into what the questions are. So we'll start it here. All right, so it starts with values. Ensuring that more individuals are elected from groups that are currently underrepresented in Parliament should be a top priority. Now, this is a tricky question because they're saying, well, we want people that are underrepresented. But the thing is that this question, if you go ahead and click agree with this, gives them the right, if they were to follow this, to just encroach on your democratic freedoms, meaning that they could just take someone and put them in a seat, either make up a seat, just so that we had some kind of diversity in the parliament. But that goes directly against the democratic process. If people are not elected, they should not be in parliament. That's all it comes down to. And I also think, on the same note, that if they're running, that you should be qualified. Just because you're of a minority group doesn't make you qualified for the job. Now, if you're qualified, by all means run for it. But I think that this is a dangerous trap, that if people are underrepresented, they want to put them in parliament with or without qualifications. All right, so we're going to go to the next one. The day of the federal election should be a statutory holiday. Now, this is up for debate one way or the other, but I think if you make it a statutory holiday, people are either not going to vote if they don't want to anyways. You get time off of work to go do it, so I think that's fair enough. There should be a limit to the length of a federal election campaign periods. Now that I totally agree with. Nobody wants to see hate smear ads every day for 3 years leading up to an election. That's ridiculous. Government should have to negotiate their policy decisions with other parties in parliament, even if it's less clear who is accountable for the resulting policy. Now, this one could go either way depending on how you look at it, but as far as I'm concerned, governments do have to negotiate their policy decisions, and that's when they table a bill in the legislation to pass into law. That's why we have debates on every bill that goes through Parliament. But in this case, that's saying that if you've got a majority government, you have to get the approval of the other parties to put this through. And I think it needs to be clear who's accountable for the law. If you're going, or policy, if you're going to bring this out, then you need to be accountable for it. So we're going to go to disagree on that one. There should be greater diversity of views in Parliament. Now, in this case, again, this is another trick question. It could go either way. Greater diversity in some aspects could be a good thing, but that depends on the diversity. And again, that comes down to infringement of the democratic process. The views that are in Parliament should be those of the electorate. Plain and simple. It should always be clear which party is accountable for decisions made by government, even if this means that decisions are only made by one party. Absolutely true. Everyone needs to be accountable for their actions. And lately there's been so much talk about this whole social justice movement. We've forgotten about individualism. So yes, absolutely. Whoever is individually responsible, in this case a party, needs to be accountable for the decisions they make. The voting age of the federal elections should be lowered. Now, this could go either way. For someone like me, when I was 16 years old, I was quite involved in Parliament. But I'm going to go with no, because our schools, our public schools, have become a sounding board for the left. I never, when I was in school, got an objective opinion. And teenagers, not all, but some definitely, are impressionable. And I really think that you can't make an informed decision. You can't have a Visa card at that age. You're not considered an adult to the point that you can move out. It's 16 in some provinces that you can be an adult, but you can't drive a car until you're 16. But at 18, there's no visa. You're still in high school. No credit cards. You can't buy lottery tickets. You can't buy alcohol or cigarettes. So if we're not trusting people with the responsibility for substances and gambling, we shouldn't be trusting them with the future of our country. Now, that one really is up for debate, and I think that one depends on how kids are educated and how the platforms are brought to them. But right now, I'm saying no to this one just because there's not enough education about it. Members of parliament should always support the position of their party, even if that means going against the wishes of their constituents. Absolutely not. You're elected to represent your constituents. If your constituents are voting for you, then that means you listen to them. They're the ones who give you their votes. Plain and simple. A party that wins the most seats in an election should still have to compromise with other parties, even if it means reconsidering some of its policies. Absolutely not. That's the idea of a majority government. This is the case when we wind up electing a minority government, which is fine. But the electorate speaks. So if that's what the party wants to do, that's how it's going to do it. Unless you're going to restructure the whole parliament, then no. A party with a majority, when they pass something, they need to run it through. And again, if there's something concerning about it, then absolutely it should be brought up. But you have to understand too that this doesn't mean that it can necessarily go through. The Senate does have power that they don't use, so does the Governor General. If it's a real iffy bill, then we have those two check marks in places where a bill can be vetoed if it's going to be dangerous to the public, and that's their job. There's no sense changing the way of it. If this is the case, then the Senate needs to go. Plain and simple. They're not going to do anything. This is the job of the Senate. Sober second thought. So that's what they do, and they can veto a bill or make recommendations to it. Canadians should have the option to cast their vote online in federal elections, even if it's less secure. Bear in mind, even if it's less secure. We're going to go with strongly disagree with that. And that's just because there's no way to vet it. Voting needs to be a secure process, and it's one of the best ways to speak out as an individual in the current climate. So no, if it is less secure, it shouldn't be done online. And my biggest concern that came to mind is a lot of our baby boomers and the older generation are winding up in nursing homes. A lot of them have dementia or Alzheimer's or some form of mental illness. What's to stop their kid from getting their identification, even if you're putting in identification at all, and voting the way they want? You can come up with a whole bunch of different things. And if it's against the person's ideation, so let's say you've got a younger man and he's got both his parents in nursing homes that aren't competent. They've been lifelong conservatives and members of the Conservative Party, and he wants to take their cards and vote for the Green Party. They would disagree with that, but they have no idea to stop it. And it needs to be a secure process. So unless they can come up with a way that's secure and a way that can be vetted properly, no. Eligible voters who do not vote in elections should be fined. Absolutely not. That's the idea of a democracy. When you wind up in a situation like this where people are forced to vote or they should be fined for not voting, you get a lot of people that aren't interested in politics, and even worse, those who aren't educated, who don't follow politics, voting for just whatever. And no, that shouldn't be the case. That's the thing with a democracy, the right to choose. And if you choose not to vote, that's your right, and you shouldn't be fined for it. Members of parliament should always act in the interest of their constituents, even if it means going against their own party. Yes, that's exactly how it should be, because that's why they were elected. when you're in, a member of parliament represents the people around it. And when that member of parliament doesn't speak for the people who elect them or who are elected them to represent them, then what good are they doing? Their job is to represent the people that voted them in. That's the whole purpose of the job. Voters should be able to express multiple preferences on the ballot, even if this means that it takes longer to count the ballots and announce the election results. No, no, this is a bad idea. And sometimes multiple preferences would be a good thing, but then what you wind up is 2 and 3-way ties. And if you know anything about the way the voting system works, basically 9 times out of 10, the person that comes in second winds up winning a majority. And it's not a good system. And it's confusing too. A lot of people won't be able to do it. So you can count and number the ballots, but it's it winds up putting the power in the pockets of other people, and there's no real clear way to get a majority that way. Like I said, a lot of times the person in second winds up winning. Members in Parliament should reflect the diversity of Canadian society, even if it means putting in place special measures to increase the representation of certain groups. No, this is affirmative action. It's not democratic, and it's not fair, and it doesn't belong in our Parliament. We've got this social justice mentality that opportunity of outcome is what they're looking for, not, and it's no good. There's no sense in doing this. Yes, Canada is a diverse country, so if you want to see a diversity in the parliament, then those people need to run and be elected democratically like anyone else, and that's all there is to it. This affirmative action stuff in politics doesn't belong there, because you're just taking the power away from the voters and doing what you want. It's better for several parties to have to govern together than for one party to make all the decisions in the government, even if it takes longer for a government to get things done. Again, no. And in this case, it would take forever. It takes forever for a law to pass now unless they really want to ram it through. But this goes against democracy. And the more parties you have in there, like, I don't know if any of you pay attention to the politics in Israel, but they've got like 75 parties, and it takes forever to get things through over there. We want our parliament to be decisive and efficient, and this takes all the efficiency out of it. Yeah, you get maybe different opinions, but things get held up for a long time, and this just causes a squabble. They can't get along in parliament now. Imagine if you had 15 different parties in there screaming at each other. They wouldn't even get to talk about anything because they'd just be hurling insults all day, and I don't trust the people in parliament to be adults. Canadians should have the option to cast their ballot online in the federal elections, even if this increases it. So this is the same question as before. The first time it was if it's less secure. Now this time around, it's if it increases the cost of elections. This is a double question that they're sneaking in there, and you're going to see this as we go on. A lot of them are repetitive, just worded differently. Now the cost of this is neither here nor there. Yes, being online can be an option, but it needs to be properly vetted, and they haven't shown us any way that they're going to make this secure. Online voting in federal elections. Here we go with the online again. Would increase voter participation. Yes, it would increase voter participation. That doesn't mean I'm for it, though, and I have a feeling that the way this is tallied is that I'm now 2 votes against online and 1 for online. It's a convoluted question. It would increase voter participation. Do I think we should do it? No. A ballot should be easy to understand, even if it means voters have fewer options to express their preferences. Absolutely. It should be easier to understand. That way we don't have the confusion and people know exactly what they're voting for. There's no sense making it more complicated than it needs to be. There should be parties in Parliament that represent the views of all Canadians, even if some are radical or extreme. I don't agree. I absolutely don't agree. We don't want radical or extreme opinions in our parliament. There's no call for it there. We don't need a Sharia party of Canada. It just doesn't need to be there. Eligible voters should not be forced to vote. I agree. If you want to abstain from voting, by all means abstain from voting. That's your right. Okay, now we're into the which would you prefer. A government where one party governs and can make decisions on its own, or a government where several parties have to collectively agree where a decision is made. So now we're into the same questions that they were asking before, just in a different manner. And I think this makes it more confusing for the people that are filling this out because you really have to read it. It's like word problems in math, even though it's the same thing. You need to go through and really read these questions to make sure that you pull out the important information that's in there and not fall into the trap. Which would you prefer? One party governs and is solely accountable for its policies or shared outcomes, or several parties that must cooperate? Again, we've covered this question before in a different form, and I think that parties should be solely accountable for their actions and that we need to start holding them accountable for their actions. Ballots should be simple as possible so that everyone understands, or ballots should allow everyone to express their preferences in detail. Again, these are just repetitious questions. Members of parliament that do what their party promised, even if it means going against what their constituents want, or members of the parliament that do what their constituents want. So I don't know if you've noticed this, but the first couple of questions there, they had the questions reversed where we were answering on the left, and now we're picking what's on the right. In this case, they're flipping the questions over where they were giving you the negative or the positive. Now they've got the positive on the other side, and you really have to read these, because if you're just going through this, you'll wind up clicking a bunch of stuff that you're not interested in or that you didn't mean to click. Which best describes your views? No further action needs to be taken to ensure that those elected in parliament better reflect diversity. Again, no further action needs to be taken. So sorry, I'll read the question. No further action needs to be taken to ensure that those elected in parliament better reflect the diversity of the population they represent, or further action needs to be taken to ensure that those elected to parliament better represent or reflect the diversity of the population they represent. This is affirmative action again, and it's a dangerous road to play. Like this whole questionnaire is flirting with Marxism. Canadians should have the option to cast their ballots online in federal elections, even if the security or privacy of online voting can be guaranteed, or Canadians should continue to vote on paper ballot. So now you notice the first one that they were saying, oh, well, we can't, even if it's less secure. Now they're saying if it's more secure. But in this case, I'm still going to go ahead with the paper ballots, because you go in to a voting station, you have a voter registration card, someone's there, they check your ID, they're able to vet who you are. You get a few hours off work to go in and do this. The system seems to be working okay. Yeah, it is a pain, and I live in a rural area, so that doesn't work as an excuse. I have to drive to get to where I want to vote. And yes, there are lineups there, but the way servers seem to work too, you never know. If a server crashes, in this case, which often happens, or the power goes out, yeah, your laptop may still work, but your internet's not going to work. Then a lot of times, if you vote that you're going to do it on, or say that you're going to do it online, you could lose your vote that way. Paper ballots are safe, secure, it's easy to vet who we are, and until I actually have a system in front of me and how they want to work online elections, I'm not going to be voting for online. Voting in federal elections is an obligation, or voting in federal elections is a choice. It's absolutely a choice. Refraining from voting is a choice right now. Like if they were to call an election tomorrow, I would abstain from voting. Or if I would go in, I would vote non-confident. So you can take your pick at that. There just aren't any leaders right now. Today they were talking about whether Kevin O'Leary was going to run. I haven't heard back as to whether he would or not. But that's totally up to you. Having many small parties in parliament representing many different views, or having a few big parties to try and appeal to the broad range of people. A few big parties, and I say this because we've already got more like if you look at America, it's practically bipartisan. So yeah, you get a lot more polarized voters down here, but we've already got 5 or 6 parties, and all that does is split the vote. And a lot of times you wind up with a majority government with only 30% of the vote or 35% of the vote. And I don't think that we need any more parties to add to that just to minimize the vote, because then You wind up breaking up the power, and someone is going to be a majority with the way our system works. So if you've got 20 parties, someone could have a majority with 12% of the vote. And that doesn't properly reflect the views of Canadians, in my opinion. Members of parliament that spend more time in their constituency working with constituents, or members of parliament that spend more time on Parliament Hill working on the issues that matter to their constituents. Now, this one's a toss up. I've heard some rumors flying around that the MPs want to take Fridays off, and this will give them Fridays off. But I'd like to see my MP. Never met him in person. Like I mentioned in my last video, Tony Clement, I've met him a couple of times, and I met Stephen Harper in person, but I've never met my local MP here now. So, yeah, it'd be nice to have them around so you could actually go in and talk to them about some of the issues. And if that means giving them Friday off, well, I guess it's a win-win as long as they show up to their office. Members of Parliament that always support policies that they think are best for their constituents, even if the constituents disagree, or members of Parliament that always support the policies their constituents want, even if the MPs themselves personally disagree. Well, we want them to do what their constituents want. That's what they're getting voted in for. Because 9 times out of 10, an MP tends to agree with their constituents if they live in that area. It's just a geographical thing, especially when it comes down to energy and transportation and stuff like that. Now, don't get me wrong, there are moral issues that stand aside from this, but most of the time I found when MPs wind up voting against their conscience, it's to do with the party, not to do with the constituents themselves. And I don't think that we should be forcing our MPs to vote against their conscience. So if something conscientiously bothers them, then our MPs should have the right to abstain from voting. They're people too. So now we're going to go through. So please select the priorities that are most important to you. Governments that collaborate with other parties in Parliament. And again, this is another way of wording it. So when you put it like that and they collaborate with other parties, that sounds like a great thing. But again, it's talking about working with several parties in Parliament. It's the same question in a different way. Strengthening the link between voter intention and the election of representatives. That's important. I think what the voters are intending to do when they elect someone should be reflected in Parliament. Governments who consider all viewpoints before making a decision, that's also a good thing. You need to look at everything from a different view. Increasing voter turnout. Now again, voter turnout's important, but this one you can tell is directly linked to the should voting be mandatory, should you not be fined, or for the online things. So no, I think voters should be coming out, but because they're passionate about what they're voting for, and because they're informed about what they're voting for, and not the methods that were mentioned in this. Governments that can easily be held to account by voters, absolutely, and I think that's one thing we do poorly as Canadians is holding the government to account. And they absolutely need to be held to account more so and have their feet held to the fire. That's got to become a priority for all Canadians. MPs that focus on what is best for the country. Now, again, this is a misleading question because this is the one, because the Parliament determines what they think is best for the country, that means that the MPs would be forced to vote against their constituents. And what they think is best for the country may not be best for it. That is the collective brain in Ottawa, which is half a brain at best. Ensuring the security of the voting process. This is important. Ensuring the voting process is easy to understand. Also important. We want people being secure, their votes counting, not getting lost. Whoever says they're voting is the person voting, and that they can understand what they're voting for. Governments with strong representation from every region. This is important, especially in Ontario. We have a lot of representatives in Toronto, which represent none of my views up here. And we have a denser population in Northern Ontario, so we don't get represented as well. So we need to have someone from every region. Allowing voters to express a wide range of preferences. This is about the numbered voting again, or the online voting. Governments that can make decisions quickly. This is an important one because they need to put things through, and sometimes bills need to be passed into law. If it's an ethical decision, it needs to spend its time there, or are they ramming an omnibus bill through? Absolutely, they need to make their time. But sometimes, especially if, God forbid, we wind up in war, they need to be able to get their act together and make decisions quickly. The ability to vote online during elections, like I said, until that's proven that it's safe and it's properly vetted, not checking that one. Better representation in groups that are currently underrepresented in Parliament. This is affirmative action, and I'm totally against it. MPs who focus primarily on the interests of their local communities, that's why we elect them. Yes, that's what they should be doing. And increasing the presence of smaller parties in Parliament. No, absolutely not. So let's go through. Profile. What is your gender? I'm a male. In which year were you born? Well, I'm 30, so 1986. What is your highest level of education? College. What occupational area do you work in? Health. Which of the following describes combined... Okay, we're going to skip that one. What is the first language you learned? English. Generally speaking, how interested are you in politics? Very interested. How frequently do you follow news and current affairs? Daily. Now this is what gets to me. Do you identify with any of the following groups? So you get bonus points if you happen to wind up in one of these groups. And I really don't think that matters. They're talking about representation in Canada. It seems a little ridiculous to me. In general, we'll put somewhat satisfied for that. I'm hoping you guys can read these questions. I feel sorry that I'm not reading them out loud, all of them. How closely have you followed the public discussion on electrical reform in Canada? Very closely. How often have you discussed it? Well, I'm discussing it with YouTube, so I think that's very often. How often do you vote in federal elections? Always. Oh, I'm a guardian. You know, the funny thing is I filled this out before, and the last time I was a pragmatist, so you get a different result every time. I think this is a messed up algorithm because I didn't change anything. Guardian tends to favor decisive governments. They can take swift action, offer a clear line of accountability. They tend to believe in larger parties that can government. Guardians are more likely to believe there is an equal chance for candidates of all backgrounds to be elected. You can read it if you want. And are less likely to feel special measures are needed to increase the diversity of members of parliament. Guardians tend to strongly believe election ballots should be easy for voters to use and understand. Guardians are less likely to see voter turnout as an area of concern, prioritize security of the vote more than other groups, more than other archetypes. They consider it important that people are free to choose to vote rather than being required to do so. Guardians are also least likely to support moving from paper ballots to online voting. Like I said, I did this one before, and I filled it out the exact same way, and last time I was a pragmatist. So this algorithm's a little bit messed up, just in the sense that the results aren't always the same. So anyways, there's the polling. So the median age is 56, almost double my age, 66% male, 34% female, other. Rural 21, suburban 33, and urban 46. So there you have the results, and there it is. Again, you know, I don't think this really makes a difference, but it's worth taking a look at. And yeah, there's pragmatist right there, which is where I fell into last time. So I think it's just kind of picking numbers at random. But anyways, there you have it. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and hopefully you go and fill this out. And I will see you guys next time.